Hello, sixth graders. We are in Unit 3B. Our lesson today is fractions and decimals. So make sure you have the title written down. Learning targets: I can write fractions as decimals, I can rewrite mixed numbers as decimals, and I can write decimals as fractions. Alright, so writing down what we read using place values. So write down this title, and then write down the word forms, and then we're going to write that number as a fraction and as a decimal. So the first one, 7/10. So as a fraction, well, the 7 here, this will tell us what our numerator is. And the tenths tells us what our denominator is. So 7/10 would look like that as a fraction. And as a decimal, the tenths is the first spot after the decimal. So if we have 7/10, that tells us in that tenths place is going to be a 7. The next one, 32/100 as a fraction. Again, the hundredths tells us what our denominator is. And this 32 part tells us what our numerator is. That's how many of hundredths we have. So 32 hundredths. And again, as a decimal, the hundredths place is the second spot after the decimal. So that's where our number needs to end. So 32 would fall or look like this. 32 hundredths. And the last one, 265 thousandths. So again, this thousandths, that TH tells us that it's after the decimal or part. That's our denominator. And how many thousandths do we have? We have 265 of them, so that's our numerator. So 265 over 1,000. And then as a decimal, tenths, hundredths, thousandths, that's the third spot after the decimal, so that's where our number would need to end. So it would be 265, right? Tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And then write this part down here. If the denominator of a fraction is 10, 100, or 1,000, or any higher power of 10, so that means 10,000, 100,000, you can use mental math and place value to convert, right? So if the denominator is 100, that tells us it ends in the place value hundredths. If it's 1,000, then we can easily write it as a decimal. And that's shown with that numerator and decimal problem right there. Okay, so make sure that you write this part down, convert to tenths, hundredths, thousandths, if possible. So if we have a fraction, our first step, and we're trying to turn it into a decimal, the first thing we want to do is, can we make the bottom number 10, 100, or 1,000 by multiplying? If we can, which then we write down these steps here, the first step is to change the denominator, change that bottom number to be 10, 100, or 1,000. Step 2, multiply the numerator by the same number. And then once you have your new fraction, then use that to write what the decimal would be. So 7 over 20, I know that 20 times 5 is 100. So pause, make sure you have the steps written down, and then we'll continue on with this problem here. So I know that I can multiply by 5 to get to 100. Whatever I do to the bottom of my fraction to keep it equivalent, I also need to multiply the top by that same number. So now 7 times 5 is 35. So I have 35 hundredths, which again, then we can turn that into a decimal. 35 hundredths being the first or the second spot after your decimal. So that's where your number needs to end. So that's how we can convert. So that's our first step all the time. Can we make it tenths, hundredths, or thousandths? The next one, 5 and 3/4. I'm just going to rewrite it like this. So now we have a mixed number. I know I can multiply 4 by 25 to get to 100. It doesn't multiply into 10. So I'm going to also multiply the top by 25. So my new mixed number would be 5, and 3 times 25 is 75, and 4 times 25 is 100. So now rewriting this, 5 and 75 hundredths. So 75 hundredths after the decimal would be like that. And then don't forget, this time we have a 5 out front. Every other time we had a 0 because there was no whole number. So now in the ones place, we fill in with a 5. So 5 and 75 hundredths. Pause, try these next 3 on your own. So 3/10, I know that I can multiply, actually I don't even have to multiply, it's already tenths. So just writing it as a decimal, 3/10 would look like that. 3 and 25 hundredths, I know I can multiply by 4 to get to 100. So I multiply the top, and my new fraction is going to be 12 over 100. So 12 hundredths as a decimal would look like that. 6 and 1/2, I know I can multiply by 5 to get to 10. So my new mixed number would be 6 and 5 over 10. Writing that as a decimal, 6 in the ones place and a 5 in the tens place. Okay, so pause and write this part down at the top. What about when we cannot convert to 10, 100, or 1,000 evenly? So not all numbers will multiply into that. So then what do we do? Well, any fraction can be written as a decimal. So to do this, we divide the numerator by the denominator. You will need to add a decimal and zeros to give yourself more places to work with. And the division stops when the remainder is 0. So you could do the division. So for 3/8, we could do long division, top number on the inside, bottom number on the outside, add a decimal and zeros, and then you just keep going until the number stops. But today we're going to work using our calculator, so that's why we want to have those in class. So to do that then, we're going to type it into our calculator as the numerator divided by the denominator, so in that order. And it's going to tell us that our decimal is 0.375 or 375 thousandths. Okay. So that's what we're going to do here. So 40 does not multiply into 10, 100, or 1,000. So then I'm going to use my calculator to help me with this one. And I'm going to do 1 divided by 40. And if I don't have a calculator and I do long division, I would set it up with the top on the inside, bottom on the outside, carry my decimal, and then I would divide from there. So 1 divided by 40 is 25 thousandths. Okay. The next one, 7 and 1/8. So I'm going to keep that 7 out front. And then I would type it in as 1 divided by 8, which would be 125 thousandths. And again, do not forget to include the whole number in front of the decimal in your ones place. Okay, so I want you to start with writing down our two vocab words here, a terminating decimal and a repeating decimal. So terminating means a decimal that stops. So 4 and 5/10 is a terminating decimal. Okay. It stops. Whereas a repeating decimal keeps going forever and ever and ever. So this would be something like 6, and the 6 just keeps on going and going and going, and it doesn't stop. Or something like 3, 5, 3, 5. It's got a pattern to it that keeps repeating. That's a repeating decimal. When we have a repeating decimal, then we use this bar notation, another vocab word to write down, along with the definition. So this is a bar to indicate that a number pattern repeats indefinitely. A bar is written only over the digits that repeat. So where that 0.3 and 3 keeps going forever, we would write it as 0.3 bar notation over the 3. The next one, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, we would put the bar notation over the 1 and the 2. Where the next one, it goes 3, 8, 5, 8, 5. It's only the 8 and the 5 that are repeating, so you only put the bar notation over that. So let's try it with some examples here. So we have 7/9. 9, again, doesn't multiply into 10, 100, or 1,000, so we would use our calculator to help us. And we're going to go 7 divided by 9, which when we do that, we notice that the 7 keeps going forever and ever and ever, but your calculator is probably going to end with an 8 at the end. That's just your calculator rounding. So we would write our answer as this, 7/10 with the 7 repeating. Okay. 3/11, again, it won't multiply into 10, 100, or 1,000, so then we're going to have to use division. So we're going to do 3 divided by 8, top divided by bottom. Oops, typed that in wrong, not 8. Sorry, 3 divided by 11. So 3 divided by 11, which goes like, oh my goodness, like this. And then again, your calculator is going to show a 3 at the end. That's just because it's rounding it. So we would write it with bar notation. The 2 and the 7 keep repeating. So we put bar notation over both of them. Okay. 2/3, that's one that hopefully we start memorizing. There's some fractions that are really good to know what they are as decimals. But if we don't know it, we'll use our calculator. 2 divided by 3, which is this. It keeps going forever and ever and ever. And then on your calculator, it's rounding that last digit up to a 7. But we would write it, don't forget the whole number in the ones place, as 4.6, and then put the bar notation over the 6. All right, I want you to pause and write down the steps here for going the other way now, converting a decimal to a fraction. So step 1, if it's a mixed number, the whole number will stand alone, so anything in front of the decimal turns into your whole number. Step 2, the numerator is whatever you have after the decimal. That now becomes your numerator, and your denominator is whichever place value the decimal ends in, and then we always simplify. So let's try some examples here. So the first one, we don't have a whole number, so we don't have to worry about that. Nothing in front of the decimal. The number after the decimal becomes your numerator. And then whatever place value it ends in is your denominator. So tenths, hundredths. So that becomes our bottom number. Now I could find numbers that we could divide the top and bottom by. Otherwise, there is a way that you can simplify fractions on your calculator. But for here, I'll show we're just going to divide the top and bottom by 2. And that would become 13 over 50. And that's in simplest form. Okay. Next one, there's no number in front of the decimal, so we don't have to worry about a whole number. Everything after the decimal becomes your numerator. This is the tenths place, so that becomes our denominator, and that's in simplest form. Next one, we've got a number out front now in front of the decimal, so that's going to be our whole number. Everything after the decimal becomes our numerator, and our denominator, tenths, hundredths, so that's our bottom number. There's nothing that 7 and 100 can both be divided by, so that's in simplest form. And the last one, our whole number, is anything in front of the decimal. Everything after the decimal becomes your numerator. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths goes on the bottom. Okay. Now to simplify that, I can divide. You could start with 5, 25. I'm going to divide them both by 125. And again, I'm going to show you also how you can use your calculator to help you simplify. But that would become 1 over 8 in simplest form. So again, pause. If you don't have this stuff written down already, please make sure that you do. Converting from a fraction to a decimal. Try to change the denominator to 10, 100, or 1,000. Make sure to also change the numerator, or do the division method. Numerator divide by denominator, and then going from a decimal to a fraction. If there's a whole number in front of the decimal, that becomes your whole number in your fraction to make a mixed number. The numerator is everything after the decimal. The denominator is whichever place value it ends in, and then simplify. So please make sure, if you haven't already written this down, write it down right now. And then just for some extra practice, pause and try these problems in your notes. That's everything for converting between fractions and decimals. Go back, make sure you have everything written down that you need to. Check to see, is this something you think you could explain to somebody else? If not, re-watch parts of the video, but please make sure that you come to class prepared. You don't have to do this, okay? But have your notes in class, so put them in your backpack right now.